Okay, so sometimes we have equations that aren't quadratic equations, but they're kind of in a quadratic form. Not kind of, they're in a quadratic form. So let's talk about what the quadratic equations look like. Ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. That's the form for a quadratic equation. But now they're saying, well, we might have, a and then something squared plus b times something. Oops, I'm putting in something for the something. Plus c equals 0. Now you're saying, well, what is the something? Well, it could be anything. So some kind of like goop, some kind of, it could be an expression, it could be, it's going to be some kind of mathematical expression. But anyway, if it can get in that form of a quadratic equation, then what we can use is called a U substitution. U as in the letter U. Now, why does it have to be U? Just most textbooks, they use what's called a U substitution. With that, then you can form a u squared plus bu plus c equals 0. And what's happening is you're saying, oh, this stuff, I'm just going to represent that with a u, okay? So then you factor it, you go through or you can use the quadratic equation. Usually these are factorable, by the way. Anyway, and so you get u equals, and you're going to get, usually you'll get 2 solutions. Okay. The thing is, you're not done there. Then you have to go back and solve for whatever x is. So you have to go back and say, okay, my glob here, okay, let's say we get answers like, I don't know, 7 and 3. So then you say that the glob equals 7, and then the glob equals 3. Okay, and then you'll have to solve those. All right, so that's just kind of an overview of what we're doing here. It's called the U substitution, and it's when our equation can be put in a quadratic form. All right, so we have an example in this video and then another example after this video. Okay, so I have this equation. It's not quadratic because it's a 4th degree equation, but I could let that x squared equal u right here. You go by the middle term, okay? Now, because a lot of times students are like, well, how do I know what to substitute the u for? It's got to be that middle term, okay, if it's in the standard form, and they usually are. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, if I took my x squared equals u, and I squared that, I would get x to the 4th, and it's squared both sides, x to the 4th equals u squared. So now what's going to happen is I'm going to change this equation in terms of u. I'm going to have 3u squared, because the x to the 4th equals u squared, minus 2u, because the u equals x squared, minus 1 equals 0. Okay? Now that's a quadratic equation, and I can solve that with factoring or the quadratic formula or completing the square. I'm going to try factoring, so I need 2 numbers that multiply to be -3 and add to be -2, and those are going to be -3 and 1. All comes back to that factoring. And we're grouping, when we don't have anything to pull out, we're factoring out of 1, pulling out of 1. Okay, so I get 3, or u minus 1 equal, or not equals, times 3u plus 1 equals 0. Okay, and you go through and you solve, you set each equation equal to 0. You're going to get u equals 1 or -1/3. So you get 2 solutions, but that's u. You have to go find what x equals. So go back to this part right here. We said x squared equals u. So that means x squared equals 1, or x squared equals negative 1/3. Do you see what I'm talking about here? Because see, this is what we got for u, and we're substituting that back in for the u. So we get two equations, one for the 1 and one for the negative 1/3. Okay, how do I solve that? Those are both quadratic equations, aren't they? So I could just take the square root of both sides. Don't forget the plus or minus. So I get x equals negative 1 and positive 1. I can take the square root of both sides here. Oh, well, that's going to be a little bit different, isn't it? So I'm going to get the plus or minus I square root 1/3, because I can have I, but that's got a fraction under the radical, so I'd multiply by 3, and I would get plus or minus, I'm going to write it this way, the square root of 3 over 3i. That's how I would write it. So I'm going to get 4 answers for this problem. I'm going to get negative square root 3 over 3i and positive square root 3 over 3i. Now they might put the I in front of the radical. I wouldn't. I'd go with the a plus bi form. So I'd write them like that, but they could be written a little bit differently. Okay, so that's the idea of the u substitution. And then we'll have another example in the next video.